Nate Diaz, the Stockton Slapper. Nate Diaz is probably the most famous fighter to never hold UFC gold, and honestly, it's wild when you think about it. This guy has been a household name for over a decade, sells pay-per-views like crazy, and has some of the most iconic moments in US history. But somehow he never got that belt around his waist. The crazy part is Nate only had one chance, and even that was only for the interim lightweight title against Benson Henderson back in 2012. But ultimately came up short in a decision that many thought was close. Then there was the Conor McGregor saga that made him a superstar. After choking out Conor at UFC 196, everyone thought he was destined for gold. But instead of a title shot, he got caught up in money fights and trilogy talks that never materialized. What made Nate so special wasn't just his fighting style, it was his attitude. The guy would show up to press conferences looking like he just rolled out of bed, flip off the camera, and somehow make you want to root for him. His cardio was insane, his boxing was crisp, and that Stockton slap became legendary. But timing and politics kept him away from championship fights in his prime. The most frustrating part is that Nate was often more interested in big paydays than title shots, which you can't really blame him for. He'd rather fight Conor for millions than grind through contenders for a fraction of that. It's smart business, but it cost him his shot at being a champion. Nick Diaz, the original Stockton bad boy. Before Nate became famous, his older brother Nick was already a legend. Nick Diaz was doing the whole bad boy thing before it was cool, and he might be even more talented than his younger brother. This guy was a champion in other organizations, but in the UFC he just couldn't get over the hump. Nick's biggest problem was timing. When he first came to the UFC in the early 2000s, he was young and the competition was different. He had some success, but eventually got cut after a few losses. Then he went to other promotions, became a champion, and developed into an incredible fighter. By the time he returned to the UFC in 2011, he was in his prime and ready to make a statement. His return fight against BJ Penn was vintage Nick Diaz. He picked apart a legend with his boxing, cardio, and pressure. Then came the title shot against George St. Pierre at UFC 158. This was Nick's moment, his chance to prove he belonged at the top. But GSP's wrestling and game plan was just too much. Nick had his moments, but he couldn't solve the puzzle. What's crazy is that Nick basically retired after that loss. He was only 29 years old and in his prime, but he got so frustrated with the sport and the politics that he walked away. He came back years later for a couple more fights, but by then his best years were behind him. Nick Diaz could have been champion if the timing had been different. Chael Sonnen, the American gangster. Chael Sonnen is perhaps the greatest trash talker in MMA history, and it's not even close. This guy could sell a fight better than anyone, had some of the most memorable press conferences ever, and came closer to beating Anderson Silva than almost anyone else. But somehow he never got that championship gold. The Anderson Silva fight at UFC 117 is still one of the most heartbreaking near misses in UFC history. Chael dominated Silva for 4.5 rounds, was literally seconds away from becoming champion, and then got caught in a triangle choke with less than 2 minutes left. It was devastating. Chael had talked all that trash, backed it up for 23 minutes, and then lost in the most dramatic way possible. But that's what made Chael special. Even in defeat, he was entertaining. His post-fight interviews were legendary, and somehow he made losing look cool. The rematch with Silva didn't go as well, and then he moved up to light heavyweight to fight John Jones. Again, he came up short, but he made those fights must-see television. Chael's problem was that he was a great fighter, but not quite elite. He could hang with the best guys in the world, make the fights competitive, and sell them better than anyone. But when it came to that final step, that championship moment, he just couldn't get there. Still, he's more memorable than a lot of actual champions, which says something about his impact on the sport. If you're enjoying this breakdown, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on future videos. Uriah Faber, the California Kid. Uriah Faber was the face of the lighter weight classes before they were even popular in the UFC. This guy was a champion in other organizations, had incredible wrestling, and was one of the most well-rounded fighters of his era. When the UFC finally added the bantamweight division, everyone expected Faber to become champion immediately. But it didn't work out that way. Faber's first title shot came against Jose Aldo for the featherweight belt, and Aldo's leg kicks just destroyed him. Faber's legs were so damaged that he could barely walk after the fight. Then he dropped down to bantamweight, which seemed perfect for him, but he ran into a buzzsaw named Dominic Cruz. The Cruz fights were brutal for Faber. Cruz's movement and footwork made Faber look slow and predictable. Faber was used to being the faster, more athletic guy, but Cruz was on another level. They fought twice, and both times Cruz outclassed him. It was frustrating to watch because you could see how good Faber was, but Cruz just had his number. What made it worse was that Faber kept getting close. He had multiple title shots, fought in some of the biggest fights in the division, but could never get over the line. His gym, Team Alpha Male, produced multiple champions, but Faber himself never got there. He was the king of the division in every organization, except the one that mattered most. Tony Ferguson, El Cucai's nightmare. Tony Ferguson is one of the most unique and terrifying fighters in UFC history, known as El Cucai. He had a legendary 12-fight win streak in the lightweight division, the longest in his history, and was a fan favorite for his unorthodox style and relentless pace. But despite all that, he never captured UFC gold. Ferguson's fight came during a time when the lightweight division was stacked with killers. He was set to fight Khabib Nurmagomedov for the title multiple times, but the fight fell through due to injuries, weight cuts, and other issues. 5 times to be exact. When he finally got an interim title shot against Kevin Lee at UFC 216, he won, but never got to unify the belt against the champion. His downfall came after that. Losses to Justin Gaethje for the interim title at UFC 249 and subsequent defeats showed a decline. Gaethje overwhelmed him with power, ended his streak and his title hopes. Ferguson's unorthodox striking and grappling were incredible, but his inability to adapt as he aged and the brutal matchmaking cost him. What's tragic about Ferguson is the what if. If he had fought Khabib earlier or avoided some of those injuries, he might have been champion. His durability, creativity, and sheer will made him a megastar, but timing and bad luck kept the belt just out of reach. He's still a legend, but never got the gold. Jorge Masvidal, game-bred street fight. Jorge Masvidal, known as Game Bread, became one of the biggest stars in the UFC with his street fighter mentality and highlight reel knockouts. His journey from backyard brawls to the Octagon made him a fan favorite, but despite his popularity and skill, he never claimed a UFC title. Masvidal's biggest moment came at UFC 239 when he knocked out Ben Askren in just 5 seconds with a flying knee, the fastest KO in UFC history. That win, along with his BMF title fight against Nate Diaz, which he won via doctor stoppage, made him a superstar. He earned a welterweight title shot against Kamaru Usman at UFC 251, but lost a decision after taking the fight on short notice. The rematch with Usman at UFC 261 was even worse. Masvidal was knocked out cold in the second round, ending his title aspirations. His style, crisp boxing, brutal power, and a willingness to fight anyone made him dangerous, but Usman's wrestling and control were too much. Masvidal also struggled with consistency against top-tier grapplers. What's frustrating is that Masvidal hit his peak late in his career. By the time he got his title shots, he was already in his mid-30s, and the division had evolved. He was a megastar who sold fights like few others, but couldn't overcome the elite champions. His legacy is massive, just without the belt. Dustin Poirier, the Diamond's close calls. Dustin Poirier, nicknamed the Diamond, is one of the most beloved and skilled fighters in UFC history. With a career full of wars, incredible knockouts, and submission wins, he's been at the top of the lightweight division for years. Yet despite multiple title shots, he's never worn UFC gold. Poirier's first title shot came against Khabib Nurmagomedov at UFC 242 for the undisputed lightweight belt. He had Khabib in trouble early with a guillotine choke, but couldn't finish, and Khabib's wrestling dominance led to a submission loss. Later, after beating Conor McGregor twice, he got another shot at the title against Charles Oliveira at UFC 269, but again fell short via submission. What makes Poirier's story heartbreaking is how close he's come. His striking is elite, his heart is unmatched, and he's beaten some of the biggest names in the sport. But against the absolute best grapplers, he struggled to defend submissions in crucial moments. His trilogy with McGregor made him a superstar, but the belt eluded him. Poirier's resilience and humility have endeared him to fans, even without a title. He's considered one of the all-time greats at 155 pounds. But those losses in title fights sting, as he was often just one moment away from being champion. His legacy shines bright, just without the gold. Donald Cerrone, Cowboy's wild ride. Donald Cerrone might be the most beloved fighter to never win a UFC title, and his story is both inspiring and heartbreaking. Cowboy fought anyone, anywhere, anytime. He holds the record for most wins in UFC history, had some of the most exciting fights ever, and was always down for a scrap. But when it came to title shots, things never worked out. Cerrone's biggest problem was that he seemed to struggle in the biggest moments. His title shot against Rafael dos Anjos was supposed to be his crowning achievement, but he got overwhelmed early and lost via TKO. What made it worse was that Cerrone was so good in regular fights. He'd go on incredible winning streaks, finish guys in spectacular fashion, and look like he was ready for a title shot, but then he'd lose the big fight and have to start over again. It happened multiple times throughout his career. The thing about Cowboy is that he genuinely didn't seem to care about being champion as much as he cared about fighting. He loved the sport, loved competing, and was most interested in exciting fights than playing it safe for a title shot. That mentality made him a fan favorite, but probably cost him his best chances at gold. He's a legend regardless, but it's wild that someone with his resume never became a champion. These fighters prove that being a megastar and being a champion are two completely different things. Some of these guys are more famous than actual champions, sold more pay-per-views, and had bigger impacts on the sport. But that championship gold is special, and sometimes the best fighters just can't get there. Whether it's bad timing, tough matchups, or just bad luck, these legends will always be remembered as the greatest fighters to never wear UFC gold. Now it's time to smash that like and subscribe button. And while you're at it, don't forget to check out our video about every holy shit moment in UFC history.